Hello everybody, my name is Pawlet Brookes and I'm the CEO and Artistic Director of Serendipity. I'm delighted to introduce Yinka and Miguel for a Q&A as part of the Phoenix Sound on Screen for Film Feels Connected to discuss Gurumbe, the Afro-Andalusian Memories. So without further ado, what I'm going to do now is just to ask Yinka and Miguel just to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves and how they got to the point of both working on this film.
Hello, my name is Yinka Graves. I'm a flamenco dancer. I'm based between Spain and England, I'd like to say, because I do a lot of things in the UK as well. I'm obviously British. Obviously we'll speak more about it, but for me, obviously as a Black flamenco dancer, Gurumbe, Canciones de tu Memoria Negra was something of a sort of a turning point. I had been working in Madrid and living in Madrid, learning in Madrid, and I moved to the south of Spain. And it's almost sort of at the same time as I was discovering what the south of Spain was that I met the team, Miguel, Ángel and so on, who were working on Gurumbe, Canciones de tu Memoria. And it also kind of coincided with a moment where I started creating work that spoke to me as a Black person in flamenco. So I think I'm still in that process of working out where that work can take me. I'm currently in residency with Dorothée Muñanesa. And again, you know, this real sort of learning the value, you know, of how we experience across the world the sort of different cultures. And in my case, flamenco.
Well, I'm Miguel Ángel Rosales, I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. Well, I arrived to the subject of Gurumbé 6 years ago. I discovered all that things behind the African presence in Spain, and I was really excited with that. And I decided to make this film. Behind the film was a big background of research about that present and the cultural legacy and the historical and social legacy. Well, I have made another films before Gurumbé, but that's probably my first main film and my more important work.
Okay then, Miguel, so you talked about, you know, you've been doing research, but you've specifically been researching about ignored or forgotten sort of African presence in Andalusia, across Spain and Portugal as a result of slavery. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Well, it's a really wide subject, no? Issue. What I can say is that presence has been really big in the history of Spain, from not only related with the slavery, also before in the Andalusian times, in the times of the Empire of Andalusia. But it's true that the more contemporary consequence and the more contemporary history is related with the slavery, with the population that came after the conquest of America. And when Sevilla, the city where I am now, becomes one of the main ports of the economy of the colonial economy. The numbers is that around 15 in some years, around 12-15% of the population of some cities in South Spain was Black or mixed race people. Some of them free, some of them enslaved. And that people has a really important influence especially in the cultural life of the city, also in the religious life. That have been totally silenced in the history of Spain, especially after the 19th century, when as other countries in Europe start to write and to build the big national histories, and that national history has to be really far, really outside of the African history, really far from the African history. But that's something really that surprised me a lot, that it's impossible to erase totally the presence of the people. And that presence now is not only in many documents that you can find in churches or in administrative things, etc. But the more important thing is that that memory is in a kind of embodiment, no? In the dance, and in many cultural characters of the culture of South Spain, Andalusian.
So you talk about it's entwined or embedded within the dance and the music. So Yinka, you previously talked about your journey in flamenco. What part did Gurumbé play in you recognizing your own journey coming through flamenco and that hidden history?
I think Gurumbé kind of allowed me to have a sort of factual understanding of something that I potentially knew already intuitively. So I think for me already it's interesting that my very body is the one that asked me to kind of go to the south of Spain, because even though I had, Madrid has an amazing school there, Amor de Dios, there was something I was like, I think I actually really need to go to the south and be where, this was all born, and really be amongst the spaces where you can hear the singing and so on and so forth. And also a little bit like, I always say a little bit like hip hop, like actually be in the spaces where the different lyrics are actually talking about, this isn't all sort of mythology. This is really about the different spaces that were inhabited, no? And so I think already in doing that, I always think of my body being wiser than kind of the knowledge I have through, the learned education that we're given. I feel like it secretly knew that somehow coming further south was also bringing me closer to the understanding that in these spaces, there were other bodies like yours. When I started flamenco, my desire to dance it always came from doing it. It always came from having experienced it, not from necessarily seeing and saying, oh, I want to learn that. And I think what I was recognizing was this kind of familiarity in a way of composing, I'd almost say, a way of relating to the music, a way of feeling the body, a way of using energy, all things that I see in a lot of different dances that we call diasporic or, of African descent or Black and so on. So I think that I had never necessarily verbalized it, and I don't think I had even really understood it, but I think that somehow I had understood it, if that makes sense. My body had understood it. So when I was called, literally about 3 months into moving to Seville, to participate in the film, I was asked to kind of very kind of randomly just called and like, oh, just come and bring a fan, do a guajira, which is a particular style, kind of improvised with all these musicians who were there kind of waiting for me. And I was new to the city, I got lost, I didn't know how to find the place that they were shooting in, which is a kind of a mythical tablao, La Carboneria. And so that was really a lucky beginning for me in Seville, because immediately I met this group of people who they themselves were looking at in what ways, well, one, that there had been Black people in southern parts of Spain, which is something that most people aren't even aware of, and two, that presence had left an imprint in flamenco. So for me, it was a real kind of meeting, a coming together of like an intuitive understanding, and then seeing, oh wow, these people have got all the facts, the archives, and the research. So I feel really blessed in a sense that meeting took place, definitely.
So Miguel, you've got the physical in terms of the flamenco dance with Yinka, but then you got the research that you were doing. Why did you choose the medium of film to make it visible? Because we're talking about a hidden history that was invisible, and you've used the medium of film as part of the mechanism to make it visible. Tell us a little bit what prompted that.
Well, I am a filmmaker. That's the first thing. But it's true that the two principal materials of films are bodies and spaces. No? And that's the two, precisely the two places where I think memory has been printed. No? With cinema, you have very good tools, no, to research and to observe the bodies and to take out some information and some emotions from there. I start all that interest for that story for the flamenco. I started to understand the importance of the black dances and the relation between the flamenco and all the Caribbean dances and all that. Traveling around Colombia or in Mali, I can perceive, I can have an intuition of the proximities, no? I have been born in one of the main cities for flamenco, that is Jerez de la Frontera, is one of the, like the New Orleans of the flamenco, no? So, but after that interest for the flamenco, I discovered, I find the importance of the slavery in the history of Spain. No? I try to mix that two things, no? to do a political ¿cómo se diría? Discurso, un discurso político, un discurso. That's why I think cinema gives me all that elements, all that thing easily, no? And also that to give the idea of the spaces as places of memory, but not only places of memory, but places, one thing, the spaces are something that is over the borders, no? Which are built by the people, not by the politics. No? And that's also the cinema with that translations and with that, because you can show different spaces in the same time. You know, you can do all that kind of place. It's really good to create a text, precisely breaking all that idea of borders. No?
So in using film and using music and dance, it's allowed you to join up the dots in terms of the Caribbean with Mexico, Cuba, although it's focused on Spain and Portugal. It starts to allow you to join up the dots. And going back to Yinka in terms of joining up those dots, of someone who starts a conversation with saying, of course I'm English, but actually I'm in Spain. And you then start to look at that whole thing of multiple cultures and how they and how you cross borders. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of the film and yourself, Yinka? You know, because that's what's happening, really, isn't it? I mean, you are an embodiment of joining up those dots.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, already my own life experience, I grew up in both Central America and the Caribbean in my childhood. So in many ways, I think I really do understand that there's something that I really recognize, even in this sort of, you know, this culture that's sung in Spanish, you know, as a British person, supposedly. But I think it really comes back to this idea, it's not an idea, this reality of the diaspora, which I think is often not really appreciated enough. How, you know, even on this project, I'm currently working with somebody from, you know, we've got Caribbean people, we've got people from the continent, we've got people from Europe. And we're also going to be collaborating with Latin Americans, all Black people in these different spaces. And it's like we are all dispersed in a way across these different places and spaces. We all have family that have, you know, that are in these different parts. So in a sense, I think we are constantly stretching across these borders, whether it's, you know, on the phone with somebody who's, you know, somewhere else. And so in a sense, I feel like giving real value, like noting that, understanding what that actually is over generations, understanding how that is not something that we should not be proud of, because for so long people have tried to sort of like ignore, no, potentially their roots and feel like, oh no, that I'm, you know, of course I'm born in Britain, it makes me only British, but it's like it's helping me to discover that it's like, no, we must celebrate, we must speak about, we must really highlight the fact that we are people who have traversed borders, have been traversing borders constantly, at one point through total force and violence, but that has made sort of who we are, and we've really created a culture which is all about adapting to those spaces and still living in those spaces, you know, and thriving in those spaces. So I think for me, I'm understanding it now as something sort of almost greater than me, and almost as part of a legacy that has been going on for many years, many centuries, let's say. And to that, I'd like to add that, you know, I've recently also found out, I think I might have mentioned it another time we've spoken, Pawlet, about a dancer in Spain called El Negro Meri, who performed, he's one of the first filmed people. Yeah. So for me, finding out about El Negro Meri, who there's this kind of ambiguity. People aren't sure if he was actually originally Cuban or if he was Afro-Andalus, but anyway, he was dancing around the turn of the century as a flamenco dancer, as well as working as a bullfighter and acrobat, you know, this incredible person. But I'm really kind of like, wow, it is important for us to know about these people. It is important for us to understand that we aren't the first. It is important for us to constantly be joining the dots with the generations behind us, because then it also means that we are also part of something that it's not, you know, we're always told as if we're like, oh, this is amazing, you're springing up, and as if it's never happened. And it's like, that's not true in any way, shape or form, you know? Yeah. This is a thing, you know, can we recreate different canons because they have been existing for a while? So at the moment I'm in that sort of, in that space of understanding how valuable our cross-bordered, our, you know, sprawling out, our yeah.
There's some of the influences on flamenco when we look at the music. So you've got the Baroque music, but you also talk about the 12 beat rhythm and the syncopation and the improvisation around the music. Were there any discoveries then that you found in Gurumbé that surprised you? Because you're saying, well, actually, you know, these things have been happening. So what did you discover that you can say, actually, we really didn't know that?
What for me was a real shock, because you remember that part in the film in Senegal where all that women are dancing the Serer dance. I was in Senegal really recording another film about fishermen, but I had also time to still with the investigation of Gurumbé. And one night I found this party and this woman dancing. When I was filming, I was thinking at the same time, well, I have closed the film with that, because now I can understand these women are doing the same kind of celebration that we do in Jerez, in my town. It's the same kind of express happiness, the same kind of express community, the same expression, the rhythm so complex, the complexity also of the dance, but especially that relation between the community and the individuality. I have already read in that time Paul Gilroy, and he talked a lot about the characteristic of the Afro-diasporic cultures. When I was in Senegal, the next day after I filmed that, I was thinking about this, all that thing that Paul Gilroy says, and I start to understand the incredible relationship between flamenco and the Serer music, for example, or any other African dance, Occidental African dances. I have read that already, but I only realized that I really embody that when I see that, when I was filming that in Senegal. So for me, that was the big, the big shock, the big thing that I discovered, like that tunes me, ¿no? Se dice.
¿Cómo?
Me impresionó mucho, ¿no? Que
it stunned me. Yeah.
Stunned me. The other thing, every step I do in the research was for me a surprise.
Oh, okay.
Not a surprise like that, like a surprise that got inside your body and your head and made you really understand deeply the question.
You know, I think about England now, and I think, you know, what percentage of Black people are there in England now? Like 3-4%? And so for me to learn that up to 15% of the population, I mean, it's like, can we just sit with that? 15% of the population in cities like Seville and Cadiz were either Black or of mixed race. To me, that's like, that really just you know, when I understood that, I'm like, okay, this isn't some minute, you know, minority. This is like a huge part of the population. And I think for me that changed everything, because I think we often talk about, oh, the presence and so on, and also then it highlights the violence of ignoring that, the violence of pretending it never happened, you know, the problem of that actually taking place, and then just kind of questioning in general, like how much are we taught, you know, how big a holes is 15% of everything that we're being told missing, do you know what I mean, or more, you know, just in that sense, really helping me to understand how wrongly we have been kind of told about, you know, the past centuries in a sense. So I think for me, really understanding that was what was fascinating. I think the other things were more a sense of like, okay, it's so nice to hear it explained that way, you know. As Ángel is saying, I hadn't been to Senegal then, but seeing, you know, those scenes, and particularly the remate, the way they cut with the music, I'm like, oh my goodness, almost there's the little boy who dances in Jerez, also in the Bulería, where they're all in a circle, and he does this thing, it's like very similar to the little girl who's dancing in the images from Senegal. So you know, those sort of seeing it so directly, I think, because I think for me, and maybe for so many of us, I think that we often feel a lot of things that we don't necessarily voice, and we don't necessarily feel we have, you know, the basis with which to say them. And suddenly it was like, okay, this is amazing. This isn't just, you know, me being mad, you know. So yeah, and I think more than anything, it's also the wonder and the importance of being able to share that with other people, you know, almost this kind of like, okay, now we can make this official. This isn't just something that you and I are talking about, you know.
We're just talking about these huge numbers of, you know, of Black people, but yet they're invisible. And you and I suppose in some ways you've looked at that when you looked at the disappearing acts, and so in disappearing acts looks at the relationship with Spain and Ghana, but overall it's this thing about invisibility, even though so it's the visible invisible, if you know what I mean. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's really interesting because obviously this was a work in progress, and we started with these films, and I think the starting point had to be the environments that we inhabit, right? The spaces where we either feel hyper visible but yet invisibilized in many ways. And so I really drew on my own experience of coming to terms with or understanding this Black presence that we're talking about in Seville. And so mentioned before, the bridge, for example, for me, that was where the sensations of what has supposedly disappeared but still being there, a little bit like what Miguel Ángel was saying before about spaces, you know, to me that space was like I was feeling the presence of bodies that, you know, I could be my ancestors in that water. And so it was really a way of kind of corporeally, if I can say that, through my body, trying to really place myself in those spaces and speak to what we cannot see and kind of give it shape in a sense. So for me, it's kind of working on the very personal. We went to Ghana, but at the same time the historical, because it's kind of like, well, what was it that was happening in this space? And so, you know, my own historical ancestral life is that I'm also half Ghanaian, and I happen to be from where one of the most important ports of transatlantic slave trade was. So in a sense, it all again crosses over for me in many ways. And it was important to revisit that. And in a greater sense, I suppose there are many different things going on there. It's also speaking to flamenco as well, that it's not necessarily something that's very celebrated or spoken about, the Black presence, you know, in the flamenco world. So in the later parts, we made the 4 films. The 2 last ones, flamenco arrives, because in many ways, you know, it's also me speaking to that in terms of my own presence within the world of flamenco. And it was also interesting to work with film. And it was wonderful, obviously, to work with Miguel Ángel, because he understands, it's almost like he's already thinking about those things, or in a sense, so it was sort of coming together, allowing him and I was very interested in it being very still and just like about observation, about obliging people to look, in a sense, to look at what we care not to look or see, or, you know, don't get to see. So now what's interesting is that it's kind of also developing, I'm kind of also bringing it back into the self, like what ways do we invisibilize ourselves to now work towards the kind of the performance piece. But I like the idea that it starts in the outer realm and then kind of comes into the inner realm.
What has the response to Gurumbé been internationally? You know, what sort of feedback? Good, bad? Has it made any impressions? Has it made people think? You know, I mean, other than, you know, we love it. So, what's been the responses?
Well, I think all the team are very proud of the long way Gurumbé has had. Sorry. It has, I think Gurumbé now is a reference, and it's not because I am the director. I think I am talking for all the team. All we are really proud of the work we did. Especially we were really surprised of the public in the United States. You know, when we did the film, we never imagined, never realized that that the film gonna have this interest in America, no? Also in Colombia. And that for me is really, really important, because I think the film has helped to give another view, another gaze of the history of Spain, you know, because many people in this country is really tired of the hegemonic history that Spain has building during years, no? Where all the minorities are treated like something strange, when the history is based in the colonialist gaze and all that. No? And for me, it's really important that Gurumbé has shown to many people all that different history. For other way, that doesn't mean that some people has been also offended by that history. I don't want to believe it. Sometimes we have lived some really weird situation as people talking me why I'm talking about that, or where I get all that information, and really suspicion of that the film is a fake, you know, or something like that. But well, anyway, in general, I am really happy of the, ¿cómo se diría, recorrido?
Of its path, of the kind of the journey it's had, yeah.
Of the film.
You know, it is a very much a groundbreaking film in terms of just giving another gaze, giving another perspective, which I think we all need to hear and to see. So finally, my question to both of you is, what next? What projects are you both working on? Are you working on a project together? You've got different exciting projects going on. What next? Because I see Gurumbé as just a starting point in terms of this area of work. So what next?
I still researching about the African presence in South Spain, because I think it's part of my culture. I forgot to say before something, no, that something that really shocked to me, also researching for the film, was, where is that people? I was really obsessed to find a kind of genocide. I mean, not genocide, but something that is playing the disappear of these people. But it's nothing like that. These people is here, our bodies, in our blood. So the black presence is really deep. It's not only that, because we are talking about really mixed societies in that time. So the process of mixture of races was really long. So we can say now that all the people, especially in the gypsy people here, but probably many of the population of the south of Spain have black descendants. No? So for me, it's really important to talk now about that in the present. Now in researching and trying to look for the people now who knows that the family are descendants of black people, and that have some memories of that. And researching about that, maybe to do a next film in a few years when I have the funds I have the background of researching. And also writing for another film about a theater company in my town. That is nothing to do with that, but it's something also really deep in the understanding of the Andalusian culture. Also that theater company, I think, Andalusian expression. And I hope we also keep working in that this disappearing act with Yinka. Also for me, it's a really important project that I hope in the future is going further and developing further.
You know, despite COVID and so on, we've managed to come on the residency with Dorothée Munyaneza, the Rwandan performance artist, choreographer, dancer, singer, amazing woman. So I'm currently kind of swimming in that because it's a really wonderful, wonderful experience to be here with other performance artists. And I'm also thinking of and kind of still looking at the next stage of the Disappearing Act, which for me is very important in terms of sort of, I think really allowing me to have an honest voice as to who I understand myself to be in terms of my dance now as a flamenco dancer, but also as a kind of, as just somebody who expresses with the body. And I'm, yeah, at the moment, that's kind of my focus for now. These two different projects, and then another project that I've already done, but that we're meant to be touring as well. So if all allows it, because obviously the world of performance is very sort of, we don't know what's going to happen because of everything's happening. But if that's possible, then that's what I'll be working on for the next kind of months, year, let's say. But I think that this new kind of stage, I feel like I'm, and potentially because of lockdown, I feel like I've had a return to reading and books and theory and things that I'm really enjoying. And obviously because of Black Lives Matter, which has been something that's always been present for me since I was really young, that I grew up reading like Assata Shakur's autobiography and so on and so forth. But now that it's kind of something that, that there's a more general awareness around it, I feel like it's also time to be much clearer and much more positioned in my expression as a Black flamenco dancer, in a sense. I think, yes, we need to speak clearly. So yeah, I think that's where I feel I'm at today. But you know me, Pawlet, it changes every time. Every time we speak, I say something different.
Well, I think, as you said, one, it's supposed to thank you both, but it's to say we are in changing times. But I think what's really interesting about Gurumbé and the conversation and the work that we've touched upon, it is the work that we're now in a place where we can punctuate the landscape and change it and have another voice, another gaze, and do that in a collaborative way where we work together. So it's not one culture is better than another. It's how we showcase more rather than less, because what we did before was have a narrow lens, a narrow view, a narrow perspective, and we were looking at the world with our blinkers on, and now we've been able to take the blinkers off, and it may be slow, but at least the blinkers have come off. And so we're now being able to open up and have these fantastic films such as Gurumbé and projects like Disappearing Act. So, without anything else, I just need to say to both of you, thank you.